Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday night product training call with myself, Alan Jones. I'm the Director of Research for Make Wellness, and Dr. Mark Bartlett, who is our Chief Scientific Officer at Make Wellness. And Dr. B, we are excited tonight because we get to talk about, well, what I believe is probably your and my favorite product tonight. Would you agree?
It's definitely my favorite product. Yep. And we're shaking things up a little bit, right? So I know you guys have had a bunch of product training and education going back for quite a while. And Alan has been really carrying the load on that. But now that it's a dynamic duo, it's just a little bit different flavor, right? And so, and we've also decided to, leading up to the convention or whatever it is that we're calling it in March, I think this is the perfect time to get you guys all sort of a little bit more educated, a little bit more familiar. So we're really calling it an 8-week curriculum, right, Alan?
That's right. That's right. 8 weeks to convention, and we want everybody nice and strong when we walk into convention. And not only strong, strength-wise, physically, but we want everybody strong brain-wise as well, Dr. Bartlett. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And man, am I excited about tonight's training. I think it's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, last week we really went into some of the basics of peptides, right? And so we played with some toys and we taught about the basics of peptides. And if you want to get a bit of a refresher on that at any time, I understand that it is recorded and ready to rewatch. Another thing that we learned is that, guys, I know that you guys are chatting away while we're talking and you're sending messages and asking questions. And, I'm not very good at like walking, breathing, and chewing gum at the same time. Either is Alan, right? We like really get focused on this. And so we don't, I got to confess, we just don't pay attention to those, but we know that there are questions that are piling up. And we've had feedback from you that you'd really like to get more of that Q&A sorted out. So next week, we promise we're going to pull together some of those questions. And, next week we do want to talk about, I believe that we wanted to talk about lean, but, and we'll attempt to do that and then answer also during that time some Q&A, some of the questions that you have. And then subsequently in the next parts of the curriculum, we'll try to do the same. Does that sound good, Alan?
Sounds great.
All right. Great. So let's, without further ado, Alan, why don't you kick us off with some slides and we'll go from there.
All right. So, as we always talk about, one of the main benefits of bioactive precision peptides is unlocking human potential. And tonight, Dr. Bartlett's going to give us a very interesting perspective on and what that really means. So,
yeah, let me just, I'll sort of kick it off with kind of an introduction. So I've always been, as I've sort of explained to you some of before, I've been involved in this, in the science of messaging in the body for years and years, like at least 4 decades, as a biochemist and immunologist. We know that there's messaging going on. There's all sorts of switches. And when you talk to an immunologist or a biochemist, they kind of view the human system kind of in much the same way as an electronics engineer or a computer engineer might. You see this series of switches that turns things on and off and sustain our health. So I want to sort of give you a little bit of insight into how I've been looking at peptides. Let's look at this guy here, right? So he's like, oh yeah, I'd sure love to look like this guy, right? I mean, I'm a middle-aged guy and I know that it's kind of hard to sustain that kind of physique that I had when I was younger. Now I know what you're thinking. Like, oh, it's all about vanity. Dr. Bartlett would love to look like this in the gym, take his shirt off in the gym. But actually, it's much more than that. When I see fitness from this standpoint, which when it comes to muscle, I really see the world from the next point of view. And that is, if you flip the slide, it's really that muscle is a kind of a health, I'm going to call it a health hub. It's a hub for so many other things besides just looking good, right? So high quality muscle is profoundly interconnected with all sorts of aspects of health, more than you would think. There are researchers in this space, Donald Lehman, Robert Wolfe. these guys have been studying muscle for a long time. And I know, Alan, this is your expertise as well. You know about muscle physiology. It is equated by these scientists as your youth. Like, it is connected to so many things. For example, even cognitive function. So muscles, healthy muscles produce myokines. And these myokines are signaling molecules that are released during muscle contraction. You may have heard of some of them. One of them, like brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That's kind of a BDNF. Maybe it's a little bit misleading because it actually can come from the muscle and influence the brain, right? So it influences neuroplasticity, neurogenesis. So muscle connected to the brain. So that's, one of the things that muscle is connected to and interconnected to. There's evidence for this, right? Muscle activity. We know that studies have shown that individuals with greater muscle mass and regular resistance training exhibit better executive function and memory and slower cognitive decline with age. So next time you think about someone who's a muscle head, think of their brain. It's actually really important. So healthy muscle, healthy brain. There's also a connection with bone density. So when you're using your muscle, it's also sort of, I guess, stimulating osteogenesis. It's the mechanical stress on the bones, but it's more than that. Bones and muscles actually share certain pathways for maintenance. And that is certainly a fact. Healthy muscle, you're going to have healthy bones as well. Metabolic fitness, that's another thing, right? If you have healthy muscle, then you've got all sorts of things like glucose control that's affected, your basal metabolic rate, which is sort of burning calories while you're sitting there. It's really important. There are some immune balancing effects that are related. Immune support, let's go there. The muscle is considered by muscle experts to be kind of a reservoir for amino acids that are involved in all sorts of biochemical reactions in the body, including the immune system. So the list goes on. Yeah. And so again, when you think fitness, a biochemist, an immunologist, a cell biologist kind of really thinks this. Your muscle is equated to healthy aging. Okay, now here's the guy again. We'll show the next slide. I know when you think of this guy, again, it's not about vanity, but actually you have to keep doing it. So you see the hourglass on the back there. If you don't use your muscle, if you don't use those muscles, just like using your brain and everything else, you start to lose it. And there is a connection to peptides here. And so we'll talk about that later. But just for now, that's so interesting, right? Like, I would just like to go to the gym, look like this after 6 months or so, and then can't I just leave it that way? Can't I just have that nice muscle tone and fitness forever? Why can't we? It would be so easy if we could. But in the next slide, I'll show you again how an immunologist would look at it. So here you see that our bodies are perfectly designed for scarcity and activity. But let me explain that a little bit. So, for a long time, things looked more like the left part of the slide than the right part of the slide. So we had to go look for our food. We were often hungry. Food wasn't always there. It was kind of scarce and hard to come by. And your bodies are perfectly designed to conserve energy. So, you have this these messages that are going on in the body all the time saying, hunt for food, food-seeking behavior. And then you have to exert a lot of energy to go hunt the food or farm for the food and do all of those things. So when you're using the muscles, then the muscles are going to grow and adapt. But if you're not using them, the body just says, well, it's too expensive to keep it. Mm-hmm. Like when your muscle size increases, right, Alan, you are creating all of the vasculature to go feed those muscles. You've got all those muscle fibers. And when you're sitting there, what happens? Like when you've got more muscle, then you have that increased basal metabolic rate, meaning you're burning more calories even when you're not working.
That's right.
So the body figures it out, just says you can't keep doing that. So if you're not using it, I'm just going to cut it out. So that's why we can't look amazing unless we just keep doing it.
Yep.
So
that muscle atrophy, Dr. B, is a really, really bad thing, and not just for our physiological function, right? For like you just said, it's for our brain function. And we have all these muscle brain, muscle bone, muscle gut, muscle, literally every organ in the body is impacted by muscle. So when your muscle atrophies, guess what the organs do as well? they
Yes.
atrophy as well. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Let me just throw another example at you as an extreme. So I once climbed Mount Rainier. So I did, well, maybe that's, so what happens when you climb Mount Rainier? It's like, I don't know, 14,000 feet. It was an awesome adventure.
Mhm.
But you are, as you're going to altitude, like let's say you're climbing Everest, you do this altitude training. Like what's happening as you go to higher and higher altitude? Your body adjusts. It's brilliant, actually. It starts to say, it says, well, there's less oxygen here. So how do I best adapt? And your body gets this message and it says, hey, you need more oxygen. The best way to do that is to create more red blood cells. So your body does that. So you're using, B vitamins and other things, and your body is creating more red blood cells. And so that you can now sort of perform at altitude where there's less oxygen. So I live sort of about a mile high here in Utah. It's about 5,000 feet where I live. And I run quite frequently, and then I'll go to sea level. And then when I run at sea level, I'm almost, I just feel supercharged. Why am I supercharged? Because it's like the equivalent of blood doping, I suppose. I've got more red blood cells than I need, and I'm like feeling super fit. And then I noticed that I've only been at sea level for a week, and then I come back to Utah and I'm like struggling again. I'm like, what? Like, why did my body dump all those red blood cells after just a week at sea level? Well, there's a metabolic price to pay, right? So as you have more red blood cells, it thickens the blood a little bit more. It interferes with all sorts of other parameters that are set by your metabolism, by your homeostasis. It says, well, you're prone to clotting a little bit more, and there's all sorts of little things that happen. Let's get back to muscle. So you've gone to the gym, you've got beautiful fitness, and the muscle's great, and it's contributing to your cognitive function and immune function, everything else. So why is the body trying to drop it so fast? Again, it's this scarcity mentality. And you'll notice that maybe our modern lifestyles are different, right? So here's the guys on the right, plentiful food. But what else are they doing? Well, these guys are working. Most of our work these days, a lot of us are sitting in front of computers, we're answering the phone, we're doing things that don't involve constant muscle, but we've got plentiful food. So we're not sort of having to hunt for food the way that we used to. So maybe is there a way that we can kind of reset that so that we don't lose that muscle quite as fast? That would be nice, wouldn't it? Maybe we should talk about that
Sure
later.
would make things easy. Yes, sir.
I think Alan's going to talk about that later. Yeah. All right, let's go back to the fit guy again. And here's the next thing I wanted to bring in. It becomes harder as you age to maintain muscle mass. Why is that? Well, there's all sorts of things that happen as you age, whether you're male or female, things change. And your body is, this is another, I guess, cruel part of nature that we could talk for an hour about, the selfish gene, and how, like, once you have passed this sort of age of reproductive age where you're contributing to the gene pool, nature kind of then says, well, you can just start declining from now on. I don't really care. But again, as scientists, we look at it slightly differently. So the next slide shows what I think about when I think about the aging. Oh, actually, I kind of got ahead of myself. I wanted to talk about,
a little bit.
It's not only harder to stay fit as you age, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but during this age, right? During this age that we live in, it's kind of harder. Again, our bodies are perfectly designed for scarcity. Here's an example that I think you'll like, Alan. Tell me about this bull.
Well, that bull, Dr. Bartlett, that bull sits in a pasture and all he does is eat grass all day long, right? And you can tell that bull right there, his primary job is to breed and make new cattle, new calves. And in doing so, he has to make sure that he eats plenty of calories. So you got to sit there and ask yourself, that bull right there, all he does all day long is chase other cows or eat grass. And so,
probably in the wild, he's probably also defending his territory. So he's like, he's a lover and a fighter, right?
Yeah, that's right. Very defensive, just like those guys on the left look like they're about to defend their territory as well, right?
Yeah. So this guy is eating kind of like this, I guess maybe you'd call it the bull's normal Paleolithic diet. And those guys on the left are kind of hunting for their food and sort of not eating too much. So this guy is in prime shape. Now, what about this guy? How does it show us the comparison between this bull and humans today?
Well, you look at humans today, and you look at, for example, obesity rates in the United States hovering around 40% right now, and that's fairly alarming because if you look back even 20 or 30 years ago, the obesity rate was down below 10%, and so what have we done? What have we changed in our diet? And that's where it gets really concerning. But you look at that bull right there on the left, he's not eating grass, is he? So he's not eating his naturally derived diet. He is eating something that somebody has basically picked and processed and thrown into a trough for him, and he doesn't have to move. He doesn't have to defend his territory. And he's probably, that actually looks like, looking at it, that's actually a cow. So I think I see udders there on the left. So she might be, just a little bit overweight from eating a lot of corn.
I asked AI to give me a bull, so let's pretend it's a bull, but he's
That's a
not
bull.
like the other bull. He's eating the wrong food. He's eating too much, and that affects his muscle quality. And it's a little bit, again, like the modern diet. And it's hard in modern times because there's so much fast food and there's so much processed food to eat right and not eat too much, right? Because it's high caloric density. So yeah, in the modern age, it's kind of harder to be that fit guy and that fit lady. So, it's harder in this age. And then, as I mentioned before, the next slide, I look at this guy. This higher quality muscle generates more force relative to the size. So, this is like, okay, this may be AI generated. And you may think, well, that's ridiculous. A bull isn't that fit. They don't jump fences. But if you look at the next slide, there was recently in Idaho, a photographer captured this. The bull, here it is right here, description. The 2,000-pound bull, described by its owner to the rodeo announcer as pretty with spots on, had accomplished its goal of throwing the cowboy who dared to attempt to ride it. But then the bull ignored attempts to round it up, and it did a couple of circles of the rodeo, and then decided he wanted to get familiar with the audience. So, I mean, just look at the power of that guy. I don't know how tall that fence is, 5 or 6 feet, and he just jumped right into that audience. I mean, so much power. It's like a locomotive. So there's some good quality muscle in that bull. A lot of power there. It happens in real life.
Yeah, if you ever watched PBR, you can see just how athletic some of those big bulls are. They are, and they will refer to them, in the PBR as athletes, and they truly are very much very skilled athletes.
Yep, and later, Alan is going to talk about the difference between the quality of muscle between those two bulls that we looked at, and maybe those two different kinds of humans that we looked at.
That's right.
So again, to the fit guy, and all these fit people that are sort of, are sticking to it and working their muscles and realizing and appreciating the importance of muscle. But again, it does get harder as you age. And there's reasons for that. I've sort of started going into it. The next slide, again, is how a biochemist looks at it, how Alan looks at it. And what you see here is like this mTOR system, which is one of the sort of the mechanisms for helping to maintain muscle mass. And it can be activated by a couple of different areas. It can be sensitive to nutrients, like certain amino acids, branched chain amino acids and things from protein. And then there are others that are sort of more sensitive to some of the peptides and hormones. What's interesting is, scientists have Alan, you know more about this than me, but over time, as you get older, you become a little less, influenced by the protein and the leucine and things like that you're eating. And so it's harder to maintain the muscle. But there is an answer to that: exercise. So exercise sort of goes through that growth factor pathway and hits that mTOR system, which maintains your muscle from a slightly different direction. And there are peptides and growth factors that are involved in that. So there are ways that you can, even as you're getting older, you can't rely just simply on the nutrition quite as much. You have to sort of do a little bit of work and also make sure that your body gets the right stimulus from that side. Yep. So having said all of that, then giving you an introduction, it's, muscle is not just about looking good. It's actually the hub of your fitness, and it is actually a measure of your metabolic health and your aging and all of those things. But you can't just sort of set it and forget it. right? You use it or you lose it. So you need to stay physically active. And the other thing is that it's harder in this day and age because we're surrounded by so much food, and our jobs don't require us to work all day. So it's harder to maintain that level of muscle quality. And then finally, as you age, it gets harder. So I hope, Alan, that with all of your experience, that you're able to give us some answers and some hope today when it comes to muscle fitness. What do you reckon?
Well, I reckon so. I hope so as well, Dr. Bartlett. And I'm going to tell you that the first 13 slides were phenomenal slides. And when we were going through them today, I was like, man, what a great explanation. And it really boils down to this very simply, and that muscle mass does equal metabolic fitness. And metabolic fitness determines everything for us as we age, correct? I mean, you're talking about muscle function. You're talking about the quality of your muscle. You're talking about how it impacts quality of life, our ability to just perform the most basic of tasks can be, it can be damaged. That ability can be decreased just by losing our muscle mass. So not only does it determine our metabolic fitness, but it determines quality of life and functional abilities and all kinds of stuff. But, when you really look at it, why does this matter? And you think about it this way, muscle is your largest metabolic organ in the body. And it comprises about 40% of our body weight, but it uses more than 80% of all glucose consumed in our diet. And when I'm talking about glucose, I'm literally talking about any carbohydrate, because most carbohydrates basically are broken down into glucose, absorbed as glucose, and stored as glycogen or utilized by the muscle at that point. And so muscle is the most metabolically active organ in the body. It uses 80% of that. Now, when you start to think about the loss of muscle mass, and this goes back to what Dr. Bartlett was talking about earlier with the myokines and all the muscle brain axis and the muscle gut axis and the muscle pancreas axis, muscle bone axis. But loss of muscle is directly associated with numerous chronic conditions. And when we're talking about chronic conditions, we're talking about everything from cardiovascular disease because of the muscle heart axis, or we're talking about, it could be cognitive decline. It could be any number of chronic illness condition that is related to the quality of our muscle that we have on our body. But think about this right here. 2% of our muscle mass is turned over every single day. Okay. 2%. That means that our body has to be very efficient at building or rebuilding that muscle that it loses every day because it's turning over because of damage or because of use of amino acids for another function or whatever. Dr. Bartlett, you talked about the amino acids in the immune system. Well, it's amazing how much muscle loss occurs when we're sick, right? Because those amino acids have to fuel our immune system. And so when we're sick, that's why it's so important that we eat, because we have to fuel not only our muscles, we also have to fuel our immune system at the same time.
It's really interesting to look at it that way, and again, last week we talked about how, basically the way that the human body runs is off DNA, right? So DNA is like building and maintaining the entire body. It's the blueprint. And every codon, which is 3 of these base pairs, codes for what? An amino acid. So that is the building material of life. It's the building material of all of the messengers and the collagen and the structural proteins. So yeah, you kind of tend to think the muscle is something that's static, but it's absolutely it's fluid, because it is the pool of amino acids that the body needs to keep all of the metabolism running. So keeping the muscle healthy is critical.
Yep, that's right. And it's so critical that we consume enough protein. You know what you talked about just a few minutes ago, that as we age, our body becomes less efficient at utilizing proteins and utilizing those amino acids. So what does that mean? That means that we have to do things to either help our body become more efficient, or we have to eat more protein, one or the other, or preferably really both. And so, in order to make our body become more proficient, that means you've got to exercise it, you've got to work it, you've got to make it healthy by getting out and being physically active. Because let me tell you something, skeletal muscle mass with age is naturally going to decline, but it doesn't have to decline at a massively high detrimental level. So when you start thinking about it, muscle loss begins in our third decade of life. That's in our 20s, guys. All right. That's in our 20s. All right. So the vast majority of us, what's it? You hear third decade of life and you think, well, that's our 30s. Well, no, our 30s is actually our fourth decade of life, right, Dr. Bartlett? So
yeah,
when you start
I'm in my
thinking about
seventh decade. That's scary.
Yeah, I know. I'm in my sixth, so yeah, I'm right there, right behind you. But it really is concerning when you start to think about the possibilities of losing muscle mass in our third decade of life. And in our third decade, our fourth decade, really our kind of our fifth decade, we lose it at about a rate of 3 to 8% per decade. So it doesn't sound a lot, but guys, it adds up. And it adds up to the point that by the time we're at 50, that loss of muscle mass can increase to about 1 to 2% a year at that point, especially if we're not doing the things that we need to do to make sure that we maintain and preserve our muscle mass. So, if you're 20 years old, and let's say that, we're talking about 40% of our body weight, and you're a 200-pound guy and you've got 80 pounds of high quality muscle at 40, you're going to be much better off if you've got 80 pounds. I said 40 pounds. It's 80 pounds of high quality muscle at 40% of our body weight at 200 pounds. You're going to be much better off in your 50s if you walk into those 50s with 80 pounds of muscle mass, right? You haven't lost it, because if you're losing it at 3 to 8%, by the time you entered your 50s, let's say you're losing 5% on average a year, that's going to be about 60 pounds, probably somewhere thereabouts by the time you enter your 50s. And then at 1 to 2% a year after that, now all of a sudden, by the time you hit 75 or 80 years old, you're talking about losing up to 50 to 60% of your muscle mass. And that's when things get really bad. That's when quality of life is damaged. And that's when we end up in nursing homes because we can't functionally survive. And so, so it really is something that we have to pay attention to. We have to increase our muscle mass. We have to increase our muscle quality. We have to basically do that because it can reduce our all-cause mortality. And there's actually studies that show that it reduces it by about 17%, which is a huge number. But you have to understand that what we do today impacts us tomorrow. It impacts us 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. So it's really important that we pay attention to that. So when you think about muscle fiber, so Dr. Bartlett, I found some really interesting slides, and I kind of want to give people just a little bit of something to think about. So this is a muscle fiber right here. I don't know. Can you see my pointer on the screen? I don't know if you can or not. You probably can't.
Can't see it, no.
Okay, so over here, this little thing over here to your left called a sarcolemma, that's actually kind of a cover that covers these little fibers over here on the right called myofibrils. And then if you see the blue in the middle, those are mitochondria. So mitochondria is where all the energy comes from to basically energize that muscle cell. Now, if you look
these
down
are the furnaces that burn the fuel and combine it with oxygen to get, it's really just like a car, right? You've got fuel, oxygen equals power. Same thing with the mitochondria, right?
That's right. That's right. And so if you look down here to the right, you've got a T-tubule, the terminal cisterna, you've got the triad, and you've got the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The triad is really basically two terminal cisterna surrounding a T-tubule that are all connected to the sarcoplasmic. Don't worry about that. Just know that those structures, I'm getting a little bit off, but those structures are basically responsible for muscle contraction. Not really important for what we're discussing as far as muscle quality or muscle mass goes, but very, very important for muscle function because they can be impeded by other things. Now, if you look at the next diagram right here on slide 17, we've got a diagram of healthy muscle on the left inflamed muscle on the right or in the middle, and then fibrosis and fat infiltrated muscle on the right. And so you look at how red and beautiful and pretty that healthy muscle is. Look how small the spaces are between the myofibrils. And then what happens when we get inflamed? You start to see those spaces become very large in between. And the more inflamed our muscles become, the more white you'll see between those myofibrils. Now, what does that do? If you go back to this, that puts a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on these sarcolemmas. And these sarcolemmas are full of nerves. And so you want to talk about the origin of pain in your muscles. Right there it is. And so when those things are swelling, you've got those muscle fibers that are separating, and it's putting that impact on that sarcolemma. That is one of the most significant issues of preventing people from being physically active as they age. And then the other thing you've got to look at, if you look at this fibrosis and fat infiltration, you look in between how much, basically, I'll call it dead space, because that's essentially what that dead space is. If you look at that, there's a lot of dead space in between each myofibril. What does that do? That red right there is extremely dense. This white, basically, that's there is not dense. And so it impacts your muscle density, which impacts muscle quality, impacts muscle strength, impacts muscle function. And so that fat infiltration is a huge issue.
And this is a little bit like, I'd say that really healthy muscular bull is on the left, and the one that's eating grain and kind of sitting around is more on the right.
Yeah, very much so.
And,
absolutely.
And so working your muscles is important, but also if you want to look like on the left, also some cardiovascular work is good because it's burning some fat, right? So healthy muscle is a result of good behavior and good eating.
That's right. That's right. And good behavior means being physically active,
right.
Whether it's working or whether it's working out or exercising or walking, or it doesn't matter. Physical activity benefits you in so many different ways. And so in closing, I don't want to pay a lot of attention to this today. I just want to kind of just make a really, really broad introduction to it. But if you look at high quality muscle compared to low quality muscle down here on the bottom, a low quality muscle has a lot of adipose tissue surrounding it. It's intramuscular, it's extramuscular, and it's intramyocellular as well. So fat can actually impact muscle 3 different ways. And so that fat, you go back here, that fat can actually get not only in between these myofibrils, it can actually get inside the myofibril itself. And so when you start talking about the damage that fat can do to our muscle cells, it is significant. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that next week. I'll give you some good examples of what we're talking about with that. So
we start to talk more about lean rather than fit, right?
That's right. That's right. And so really, and how important that fit lean combination really is to overall muscular health. And so when you start going into it and you really think about this process of aging, the process of aging can be very detrimental on muscle health and metabolic fitness. And, as we age, we have a tendency of our homeostasis can become disrupted. It really can impact the balance between muscle synthesis and muscle breakdown. But the ultimate result of losing that homeostasis, losing that balance, is a loss of muscle mass. And so, then on top of that, you go back and you look at this bottom part here, that fat infiltration. You're lessening the density of those muscles. You might feel like you have the same muscle mass, but you really don't, because your muscles are so less dense than what they would be had you had high quality muscle. And then on top of that, like we looked at over here, you've got inflammation and how it can cause a lot of pain, leading to becoming more sedentary, less active. And you think about all of those things can significantly impact our metabolic fitness, our functional abilities, our quality of life. And so you got to start sitting back and go, okay, what can I do besides the right diet? The right diet is very important. Besides getting an optimal amount of sleep, right? You know, we talk about those different pillars of health. Sleep is one of those, you know, ultimate pillars of health. Exercise. Exercise is so vitally important to keep those muscles active, keep them moving, keep them burning energy, keep them consuming that fat, keep them, you know, if they're burning that fat, it doesn't get stored. And that's important to understand. And so, you know, you start to think about, okay, what can I do, especially as I age, you know, and as I get 60, I need more and more and more help to make my body more effective. And so what can I do? Well, you know what? Here's one thing we can do. We can take our Make Wellness Fit. And our Make Wellness Fit has so many benefits. Its primary outcome is definitely to increase our muscle tone. And it does this through multiple mechanisms of action. So, for example, it increases our muscle protein synthesis. It helps to inhibit muscle protein breakdown. It helps to reduce that inflammation. So guess what we just did? We improved our muscle mass. We improved our muscle quality. We reduced the inflammation. And another really interesting thing that this does, we'll talk a little bit more about it in a second, and Dr. Bartlett touched on it briefly when he talked about myokines, is it FIT actually inhibits the expression of a myokine called myostatin. Now, myostatin is different than most myokines. Most myokines are secreted by contracting or exercising muscles. For example, irisin is a myokine that is secreted by exercising muscle that benefits muscle protein synthesis. However, myostatin is the one myokine that is secreted by sedentary muscle, and it actually causes muscle protein breakdown. So we want to inhibit the expression of myostatin at every possible opportunity.
Let me, can I just interject there a little?
Absolutely.
Why does the body do this? And it goes back to that picture that I showed, right? And I said, you have to keep doing it. You have to keep exercising. And why? It's because of this evolutionary, you know, we've designed perfectly to maintain and not to spend too much energy. So again, the body sees the muscle that's not being used as a wasted opportunity, wasted energy. And so that myostatin is actually important because the body is just saying, here's how you dump that muscle that you're not using, because we're all about conserving energy. And
right.
And so when we're talking about the strategy here, it's not to I don't know, just go overboard, but really maybe just sort of reset the level at which your body says, hey, it's time to dump that muscle, right? Just give it a little bit of help and stimulate those pathways that are more about building muscle and sort of delay those pathways that are about dumping the muscle.
Yep. No, that's a great point. And, you know, you think about other times when myostatin expression is high as well, Dr. Bartlett. One of those times is if we're injured. Let's say that we're injured and immobilized. What is our body trying to use those amino acids for? To recover, right? To repair and rebuild. And so when we're injured, we know that myostatin is expressed highly because it helps to break down that muscle tissue, release those amino acids so that those amino acids can be used to try to rebuild the damaged portion of our body. It's that, you know, that first threat, that priority, right?
Yep.
And it's amazing how the body works and how the body will take away from other parts of the body to fix something that might be broke. But that's the way our body works. It definitely addresses the first threat. And that's exactly part of that, what you're talking about with that evolutionary aspect of how our bodies basically utilize things to fix itself. It's amazing what it can do. So some of the structure function claims, let's get into this a little bit and let's get this out of the way so that we can really do a deep dive into what FIT does. So here are approved structure function claims that we can say, that we'll print, that we'll, put in documents and so forth. So it supports muscle physiology and aids healthy muscle retention, number one. Number two, may help decrease age-related muscle loss and support overall health and well-being during aging. And then number three, may support a healthy body composition, promote a balanced metabolism, and help maintain a healthy inflammatory response.
Let me step in here. So, okay, structure function, it just sounds like it's okay. This is about compliance. It's about regulatory sort of situation. Now, when we're in this nutrition industry, there are two bodies that govern what we can and can't say, right? The FDA, it governs drugs, and it says, yeah, you can't make a disease claim unless you're a drug. So if you're in the nutrition space, we're not dealing with drugs here, right? These are nutritional supplements. And so it's very important that we understand that distinction, that we don't say this is to cure a disease or mitigate a disease. We're talking about the structure and function. So what happens with the body that's normal and how this supports normal processes. The other thing, though, that I think you need to know is that there's another regulatory body called the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, and it is obsessed, and its job is with truth in advertising. So what they govern is you can't just say anything. You can't just make stuff up. You can't just say that your product does something that it doesn't do. So if you do say that your product does something, you need to have some proof and some studies that back it up. And that's what's pretty significant about this. These three things here is that they are these claims are structured in a way that very carefully tell you this is not a drug, right? This is not a drug activity. It's not curing a disease. These are the parts of the body that it supports. And that's what we've been talking about so far, is all of the healthy sort of the ways that your body can act. But secondly, everything here has a study that can verify the validity of those statements. And that's what you're going to go into next a little bit, right, Alan?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And one more point, Dr. Bartlett, if you look prior to seeing these structure function claims, we haven't made a single claim that is not supported or substantiated by significant research. And you can go back and even look at everything we talked about with muscle. These are all very possible scenarios that occur on a daily basis with a huge number of people in our world, in this world that we live in. And so we start talking about structure function claims. Now we're talking about our product. This is what FIT does.
Right.
And now we're about to get exciting, because when you see what it really does and you understand how, now you understand why we're so excited about this product. So let's talk about, there's a couple of things that we need to look at in the product. The first thing, of course, is the PeptiStrong Plus, but how it works in combination with our metabolic matrix technology. And so when you start talking about this particular product, the PeptiStrong Plus, how it promotes efficient muscle protein synthesis, how it prevents muscle loss, how it lowers the expression of chronic low-grade inflammation. Those are really just repeats of our structure function claims. How it inhibits the expression of myostatin. And, we also talked about how we can enhance that with exercise and physical activity. But we'll start to get into how it enhances recovery from exercise-induced muscle damage. That's one of the main preventers of people going back to the gym or exercising on the second day, because again, that exercise-induced muscle damage causes pain. And the older we get, the less we like pain, right, Dr. Bartlett?
Yep, with you there.
Yeah. So and we're going to talk a little bit how in our particular product, how we incorporate this metabolic matrix technology into enhancing the synergies of our bioactive precision peptides. And so we've got a lot of great things to talk about. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about what the research shows about our bioactive precision peptides. One of the things that we know is that following exercise-induced muscle damage, we actually get about a 47% decrease in fatigue and a 103% increase or greater strength recovery following that muscle damage. Now, you think about that for a second, 47% less fatigue. Now, this was all within a 72-hour time frame after performing very, very stressful and damaging exercise. When I say damaging exercise, I'm talking about exercise that induces muscle damage. So in other words, it induces soreness. And soreness, the recovery from soreness can last sometimes for some people 2 or 3 or 4 days. And it's usually, we always talk about, in the athletic world, we always talk about day 2 being more painful than day 1 because that soreness really has a tendency of setting in. But if you think about this, 47% less fatigue and 103% greater strength recovery following that exercise-induced muscle damage. That means that our soreness is decreasing at a significantly greater rate than it did with the placebo in these studies. Another benefit is that we've got 4 times greater protein synthesis during a remobilization period following 7 days of single leg immobilization. Okay, so what they did in this particular study is they basically took a leg, put it in a cast, and you will be shocked. If you ever wanted to do this, get a sling, put your arm in a sling, put a splint on it, don't move it for 7 days, come back and measure it, and see how much muscle mass you lose in as little as 7 days. It is massive. You would be shocked if you've ever done that. If you've ever broken an arm or broken a leg and put it in a cast, you know that your muscle is a lot smaller when they take that cast off than it was when they put it on, right? Which is the other reason why they've got to change the cast 4, 5, 6 times during that 6-week healing period, because that cast is not as effective when your muscles are depleted. And so, so when you talk about having a 4 times greater protein synthesis, that means they're losing less muscle mass during that 7 days of remobilization. Okay, so during the remobilization period, they got 4 times an increase in muscle mass. That's huge. They also had
it's so, Alan, it's kind of, if you go back to sort of, again, how scientists look at things, and I showed you that like crazy diagram of how there's this mTOR pathway. So there's this biochemical pathway in the body that sort of is obsessed with maintaining the muscle. And evolutionary wise, right, that we're kind of designed to jettison the muscle when we don't need it. So that's what happens when you put it in a cast, right? It's the body's way of preserving energy. But remember, I said that there's this nutrient sensing pathway. So if you get whey protein, for example, if you've got protein, it's going to trigger that mTOR pathway. But it's not as strong as if you also use the exercise pathway. And that exercise pathway is also linked to peptides and proteins, these hormone signals, growth factor signals that also influence this mTOR pathway that is obsessed with maintaining muscle mass. So I think what we're seeing here is the peptide that has a certain shape that is able to fit into that receptor on that side of the muscle building sort of equation that helps to maintain it. Just kind of resets that level to maintain it a little bit longer.
Yep, exactly. And so, yeah, and that's the power of these peptides when you've got that much greater protein synthesis following full immobilization. That is a massive. Anyway, you can't even really understand the significance of that and how that helps us overall in the preservation of our muscle mass. And maintaining that muscle mass, especially as we age. And so these peptides are very, very powerful. And the last point that we make, you see the 54% increase in performance. That increase in performance was compared to a placebo, again, after 72 hours of recovery from that exercise-induced muscle damage. Again, what does that tell you? That tells you that your soreness is less, your muscles have recovered, your fatigue has decreased, and your strength has recovered. And so these peptides have tremendous science behind them, showing how they benefit overall muscle function, muscle quality, muscle mass, the entire gamut of muscle health.
Right.
And
These are
so,
from human clinical studies. And again,
yep,
they're, if you look at these numbers, you kind of think, well, whoa, I've just joined the call. Like we're talking like injectable, synthetic, really powerful peptides, right? And the answer is not. These have been isolated very scientifically, very systematically from the fava bean. And these studies have been done with that peptide that has been basically extracted from that plant.
that's right. That's right. So let's talk a little bit now. So moving on, let's getting to the benefits of the metabolic matrix technology and how that metabolic matrix technology supports the different mechanisms of actions enhanced by these the bioactive precision peptides. And so when you think about the metabolic matrix technology, what it does is it actually targets multiple aspects of that whole muscle metabolism and cellular function mechanisms of action. And so it essentially, ultimately, what you need to understand is that the metabolic matrix technology helps to provide an essentially optimal conditions for muscle protein synthesis. And we'll talk about each one of the ingredients and get a little bit more in depth, but this metabolic matrix technology, we talked a little bit earlier about aging and how it affects efficiency, how it affects efficacy. Well, this metabolic matrix technology actually improves the efficiency of our bioactive precision peptides in enhancing muscle protein synthesis. And so that's one of the reasons why it works so well with this combination of synergistic ingredients. And so the first ingredient that we'll go through is actually it's an NAD precursor called nicotinamide riboside. And NAD plus, it is a crucial coenzyme that is involved in cellular energy metabolism, numerous other vital processes. But when you can take nicotinamide riboside and increase cellular NAD levels, these NAD levels actually decline with age. And they're actually showing that NAD, and a lot of people will take injectable NAD, they'll take NAD in multiple different ways, but it actually has a very, very powerful anti-aging benefit. And so higher NAD levels support mitochondrial function, energy production in muscle cells. It activates these little family of proteins that are involved in cellular health called sirtuins. And sirtuins are definitely involved in longevity. And in fact, there's been clinical trials in older adults that have found that nicotinamide riboside supplementation improves muscle mitochondrial function. And so NR, nicotinamide riboside, is very, very important in playing a supportive role in maintaining muscle health, and especially as we age. And so you think about that and you combine that with another ingredient in our metabolic matrix technology called methylcobalamin. So if you think about methylcobalamin, yes, it is the active form of vitamin B12, plays crucial roles in DNA synthesis and regulation, red blood cell formulation, neurological function, but it's also involved in the metabolism of proteins and amino acids. It supports the production of energy in the cells, and especially in muscle cells. And it is particularly important for maintaining healthy nerve function, which is crucial for muscle control and strength. If our nerves are not functioning properly, our muscles cannot contract properly. If our muscles don't contract properly, we lose all kinds of abilities to function properly.
When I think about these support ingredients, so, really the horsepower is the peptide that is helping to sort of change that level at which our body decides to keep the protein and keep the muscle, right? I think about this car that I was obsessed with that came out. It was the Dodge Charger that had the huge motor in it. It was called the Hellcat, right? You guys remember that? I don't know if there's many petrol head people on the call, but the engine was so big and it generated so much horsepower that normally there's a fuel line that goes to the carburetor or the injectors in a car, and it's usually just a 1/4 inch is enough. A 1/4 inch diameter fuel is enough to get enough fuel to most car engines. But this car needed a 1/2 inch diameter fuel line. So imagine you're building the muscle and you're giving it all the right signals to maintain itself. Then it actually means that maybe you need to increase the size of the fuel line, which means just provide ingredients that will support the increased function of the muscle. You want high quality muscle, then let's provide some of the cofactors that it needs, like the methylcobalamin and also the NAD, which is like intricately involved in basically generating the power that the mitochondria is able to develop. So it's really, when you see nutritional formulations, this is really the way that a biochemist looks at it. We just say, hey, you're preserving muscle mass. This is terrific. But what if you're preserving muscle mass and you're not giving it the fuel that it needs at the right level? And that's what some of these other support ingredients do.
Yeah. And think of it another way, Dr. Bartlett, one of the major issues with a lot of these nutrients that are contained in our fit is the fact that a lot of people are deficient in these nutrients. And we'll talk about a couple of them here in just a minute that have a really, really high rate of deficiency. And so if we're deficient in some of these nutrients, and for example, as we age, our bodies have a really, really difficult time absorbing vitamin B12. If we don't have enough B12, then none of these things we just talked about with our B12 can function properly. And so
it becomes kind of a limiting factor, right? It's like having a kink in the hose. So
that's right. Yeah. And so, how do we prevent that? How do we, again, you hit it perfect when you start talking about looking at those metabolic pathways and what are those cofactors and coenzymes and what are necessary to make these things function at a level that has never been seen before. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're providing not only the peptides, we're providing those cofactors and coenzymes as well. And so the next one we'll talk about, moving on, because we're almost at our hour and we're about to be cut off here, Dr. Bartlett. So I need to talk a little faster. So our next nutrient is pyridoxal 5-phosphate, which is the active form of vitamin B6. And B6 is crucial in numerous enzymatic reactions, specifically involving amino acid metabolism. So it is essential for metabolizing these amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. It plays a role in the production of neurotransmitters that regulate muscle function. It's involved in glycogen metabolism, glucose storage in muscles. It is associated with better maintenance of muscle mass in older adults. And studies have shown that vitamin B6 deficiency can significantly impair protein synthesis and actually lead to muscle weakness. So this vitamin B6 is a critical cofactor in the amino acid metabolism initiated by our peptides.
And these B vitamins are they're very labile. They call labile meaning they're easily destroyed by heat and light. Mm-hmm. And they have a short half-life in the body, which means they need to constantly be replenished. And so they're some of the most commonly sort of marginally deficient nutrients. And so you just need to, make sure that you get enough of these. And it's really a nice, I think, insurance policy to have them in this product.
Yep, I agree. The next two ingredients we're going to talk about magnesium glycinate and vitamin D, and how crucial these are. Now, these are two nutrients that people have a very, very high rate of deficiency. In fact, I've seen some studies that have actually shown that in specific populations that magnesium can be deficient as high as 80% of some of these populations. That's concerning because magnesium plays a role in more than 300 and actually studies are actually starting to show that there's actually more than 400 enzymatic reactions in the body that is entirely dependent upon magnesium as a coenzyme to those reactions. So what does magnesium do? It's crucial to ATP production. It supports the function of ribosomes. You go back to our DNA, Dr. Bartlett. What is the function of ribosomes?
They're helping us get from this to this, right?
Right. Yep. So ribosomes are where protein synthesis occurs in the cell. Ribosomes don't produce proteins without magnesium. Magnesium regulates calcium flow into the muscles. That affects muscle function because calcium and magnesium are both very important in muscle contraction and muscle relaxation. Vitamin D, we'll move to it real quick. It's crucial for, basically, it's a fat-soluble vitamin that has also a very, very high rate of deficiency, especially this time of the year when people are cold and they're not outside and they're not in the sunshine a lot of the times. And so deficiency of vitamin D significantly increases over the winter months. But it is it's a vitamin that basically kind of has a hormonal type effect in the body that has a role in calcium homeostasis, bone health, muscle function, promotes the differentiation of muscle precursor cells, and basically the conversion of those into mature muscle fibers, helps support anabolic signaling pathways. Vitamin D also is a very, very powerful anti-inflammatory as well, which is one of the reasons why deficiency leads to a high rate of inflammatory-based diseases and conditions as well. So
I think we can't ignore point 3 there. Like you saw that word, and I've used it a few times already tonight, mTOR, right? So this is central to the pathway that helps to maintain muscle mass. And here we go, the vitamin D is actually supporting that complex.
Yeah. Studies have demonstrated that vitamin D supplementation is significantly increased or will significantly increase muscle strength in adults with deficiencies. And so it is extremely important in mTOR, maintenance of muscle health, muscle strength, and it's very, very critical, especially this time of the year. We need to supplement with it. We need to make sure that our vitamin D levels are at an optimal level. The last ingredient we'll talk a little bit about is our green coffee bean extract. This provides essentially in each serving 100 milligrams of caffeine, not a major dose of caffeine. We're not looking for a stimulant effect. We want caffeine's ability to enhance that glucose uptake in cells so that it supports cellular energy. It also has an influence and plays a role in fat oxidation and utilization. And this is extremely important because caffeine can actually increase mitochondrial biogenesis in skeletal muscle cells. That is incredibly important because when we increase mitochondria, guess what we do? We increase or optimize basically the function of our cells. And so we can enhance and increase and optimize muscle cell function by increasing and enhancing our mitochondrial biogenesis.
Yeah, remember the mitochondria are those little furnaces that combine fuel and oxygen to give you energy. And so as the muscle is maintained and you need more of these mitochondria, basically you're burning more fuel and burning more oxygen, right?
That's right. So recommended use, most people I think that are taking the product will probably take it either first thing in the morning with the first meal or take it before a workout. I like to take it before a workout. I think it enhances my workouts tremendously. There are days if I've had a really, really hard workout, Dr. Bartlett, I might take a second dose of FIT after that workout at some point, basically to, enhance that recovery process as well. Don't be afraid if you'd like to. Don't be afraid to take it twice a day. Don't be afraid also to kind of, adjust your times and figure out when it works best for you. But always remember this: compliance, using the product on a daily basis is the single most important factor in getting the benefits of our FIT. Dr. Bartlett, when do you like to take FIT?
Yeah, I really kind of take it first thing in the morning. Well, not exactly when I wake up, but sort of when I'm awake and at my desk and before I eat my first meal or when I'm doing my workout. So just before, that's pretty early. And Yep.
So when you think about it, you think about the importance of fit. It really is a proprietary bioactive precision peptides formula because we combine our metabolic matrix, we combine the peptistrong. This formulation, this combination of cofactors and coenzymes, they work synergistically together to enhance that muscle protein synthesis, to enhance those metabolic pathways, and improve the efficiency and efficacy of those bioactive precision peptides. And probably one of the biggest things about it, you think about it when you hear fava bean protein or something, there's a lot of people that have this misconception that it's going to taste really, really bad. And so I've tried fava beans in the past, and I'm not a fan of the fava bean, I have to admit. So when I first started working with Fit, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm going to like this or not. But I will tell you that our flavor chemists and our developers that we worked on this product together did a fantastic job. And that's one of the reasons why I also take it first thing in the morning, but I also get my workout first thing in the morning. But it's really like taking a big glass of orange juice. And it's very refreshing. It's very clean. They did a fantastic job of flavoring the product.
Yep, I enjoy it.
Yeah. So it's very convenient. It's put in stick packs. One of the things I love about it also is that it's not in capsules. This is a liquid delivery system. So this thing hits your system and it is taken up and absorbed rapidly. And so you start to feel it almost immediately. So for me, it's a very experiential product. I love that about it. It's a very clean product, no artificial colors, manufactured in the USA. There's no sugar, no artificial flavors. It fits every component of our Pure Promise. And speaking of Pure Promise, we'll close with that tonight. We want you to understand that our products are manufactured in the USA. They're manufactured in NSF certified facilities. Our ingredients are sourced from around the world, but those ingredients are tested. They're tested for not only efficacy, but cleanliness. They're tested every possible way that we can test them before, during, and after production. And then on top of that, we are in the process of completing our NSF product certification program. That's a long process. You've heard me talk about that if you've been on here before. It takes a long time to get our products certified. We're in the middle of that right now. We expect to have those certifications fairly soon. I don't know when or how soon, but that is all in process right now. As I said a while ago, extensive in-process finished goods testing. Our manufacturers possess very, very good manufacturing expertise, and we will produce and distribute clean products. So we have a clean slate philosophy. You can read about that on the hub, and that will tell you what we do use, what we don't use, and we will not use things that are controversial or unclean. And so, Dr. Bartlett, that concludes our presentation tonight on Fit. And
I hope you've all enjoyed it. Our favorite product. Man, there's so much more to talk about, but it'll be coming through in drips and drabs throughout the rest of this curriculum. I'm sure glad you're able to join us tonight and hope you can join us again next week.